Today I am here to announce that Judge Charlene Olmedo held David Anthony Burke, who goes by the name David spelled D4VT, to answer for the horrific and barbaric killing of a 14-year-old at the time, Celeste Rivas Hernandez.
That's DA Nathan Hochman out of L.A. talking after the conclusion.
Judge Charlene Olmedo said 11 words that ended months of speculation sufficient because exists to hold this man for murder. Not conviction. Not the end. Just the beginning of what happens when the evidence outlasts the silence. Picture a car, not moving, parked in a tow yard forgotten for months, until someone opens the front trunk and finds what 5 months of silence had been hiding. That image, an ordinary vehicle turned into a crime scene by neglect and time, is the visual anchor for everything that follows in this case. Before we go further into what the evidence actually shows, make sure you're subscribed to this channel, because we don't just cover the story, we follow the facts. The facts, as laid out in a Los Angeles courtroom over 5 days, are these. David Anthony Burke, known publicly by a stylized stage name.
We just wrapped up David's preliminary hearing. So this was over the course of several days. This is where the court would decide if there is sufficient evidence for this case to move forward to trial. Remember, he faces murder, continuous sexual abuse of a minor, unlawful mutilation of human remains charges, all in connection to the death of 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez. We know her dismembered, decomposed remains were found in a Tesla out in an LA tow yard back in September of 2025. A Tesla allegedly registered to David. And the purpose of this hearing over the last several days was to determine if there is sufficient probable cause, if there is
faced
enough
a preliminary hearing on charges of first-degree murder, continuous sexual abuse of a minor, and unlawful mutilation of human remains. The alleged victim, Celeste Rivas Hernandez, 14 years old when she died, though the relationship prosecutors described began when she was 12. Her remains were discovered in September 2025, inside a Tesla registered to Burke, sitting in a tow yard where the vehicle had been abandoned for months.
Celeste Rivas Hernandez, we know her dismembered, decomposed remains were found in a Tesla out in an LA tow yard back in September of 2025. A
preliminary hearing is not a trial. It is a filter, a legal mechanism asking one narrow question: is there enough evidence for this to proceed at all? The standard is deliberately low. Probable cause, not proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And that distinction matters because what unfolded in that courtroom was not a verdict. It was a preview of two competing stories built from the same pile of evidence. Thousands of text messages existed between Burke and Celeste. The prosecution and defense drew from the same messages and constructed opposite narratives.
Here. We had LAPD Detective Corey Farrell back on the stand, talking about this plethora of text messages between David and Celeste. Thousands of messages. This is something that we were waiting to see. Talked about it on Friday, the images, the text messages. But today, he talked about the conversation leading up to April 23rd, when prosecutors claim David killed Celeste. Talk to me about what those conversations were.
This was so fascinating to me, Jesse, because opposing counsel here, the prosecution and the defense, they're presenting the exact same digital evidence here. They're presenting this same text message conversation between David and Celeste. And based on what these different attorneys are essentially cherry picking from these conversations, we are getting a very different view of what happened between the two of them and what was said the night before Celeste was
The prosecution's version, established through LAPD testimony, was procedural timestamps, a pickup location, an Uber ride arranged for the night of April 23, 2025, and a message from Celeste confirming she'd arrived at his home. Simple, sequential, damning in its ordinariness.
They presented select text messages from hundreds, thousands of messages between the two during these 2 or 3 nights. And they were meant to basically just establish time, location, the two of them arguing, the two of them coordinating when and where to meet up, the two of them deciding on a pickup location for the Uber, and then Celeste alerting David when she apparently got to his home just after 10 o'clock in the evening on April 23rd, 2025, and asking him to let her in. So very basic facts there.
Then the defense introduced messages the public hadn't seen. Celeste, in the days before her death, threatening to tell Burke's mother and business associates what she knew, threatening to end his career.
Some of this. In those messages that were shown to the court, that Detective Farrell read to us, Celeste tells David that she's going to ruin his career. She tells him that she's going to tell her father lies about him. She tells him that she has contact information for his business associates, and for his mother, she tells him that she's going to call his mother, Colleen Burke, and tell her damaging information about David. Now, we previously have not seen these messages.
She never spelled out exactly what that meant, but prosecutors argue the implication was unmistakable. She was referencing evidence of the abuse itself, and that threat is what transforms this from a killing into an alleged execution. One committed, prosecutors say, to prevent financial ruin and to silence a witness. 2 of 3 special circumstances that make this a death penalty eligible case.
Brought up during their closing statements just now. Celeste did not, at any point during this back and forth, based on what we've seen in the courtroom today, explicitly threaten to disclose anything criminal about David. She did not spell that out, but what she's...
Here is the irony sitting at the center of this hearing. The same records used to establish a timeline of coordination were used by the defense to argue something closer to provocation. That it was Celeste who demanded the meeting. Celeste who pushed past Burke's refusal.
Applied. Here's where there might be an issue, though. Lying in wait. It seems to me, based on the text message conversations we were just parsing through in the courtroom, that Celeste was actually the one who demanded she and David have this meeting on the evening of April 23rd. She was the one who pushed him to have an in-person conversation. They were fighting about whether he was dating somebody else. She became very upset after seeing social media posts featuring the 2 of them. And it sounds like that was what triggered this argument. So she demands to see him. He tells her no. He's getting ready for a trip to Singapore. He says his parents are there visiting. He doesn't have time. She demands to see him. And finally,
Celeste, who was, in the defense's word choice, the one applying pressure that night. The judge struck references to physical assault from the record, reminding the courtroom plainly, she is the victim here. She is not on trial.
About physical assaults from Celeste. That was actually stricken from the court record this morning. The judge explained she is the victim here. She is not being charged with assaults. So until this goes to trial and the defense is presenting a self-defense argument, that's simply irrelevant. But that did come up.
But ask yourself this. If the same digital trail can be read as a lure and as a confrontation, what does sufficient evidence actually protect against, and what does it leave for a jury to untangle later? That's the moral center of this case. A horrific and barbaric killing. That's how the district attorney's office described it twice in the same afternoon. The evidentiary gaps were real, and the defense leaned into them. No surveillance footage exists showing either of them entering or leaving the home. The system had simply overwritten itself by the time investigators went looking.
Staying at the time. The LAPD detective, Corey Farrell, the final witness for the prosecution during this preliminary hearing, he spoke to that today. And he laid out what I thought was a very reasonable explanation. He says by the time they tried to access that security system to search for that video, it had been so long, it had been months, and the system simply overwrote itself. It wasn't stored there anymore. Now, we don't know if somebody may have gone back and deleted that. We don't know if the cameras may have been turned off during that time.
Months after the fact. The Uber driver who allegedly transported Celeste to the house told police he had no memory of the trip at all.
Absolutely. I was wondering last week, as the prosecution was calling their witnesses for this preliminary hearing, are we going to hear from that Uber driver at any point? We've heard about that piece of the investigation for months now, that an Uber picked up Celeste in Lake Elsinore, where her family lives, and then dropped her off at David's home, just about 80 miles away in the Hollywood Hills. We haven't heard from this Uber driver yet. Well, that came up today in court. Apparently, LAPD did interview that Uber driver, and he denies having any recollection of that trip. He cannot definitively confirm that he dropped her off at that time, just after 10 p.m. that night, and he does not remember picking her up or driving her there. That is absolutely...
And the medical examiner could not narrow the time of death beyond a window of minutes to an hour, complicated further by months of decomposition before the body was found.
That's right. I mean, he testified the other day, either one of those two penetrating wounds that they attributed her death to, either one could kill somebody in, quote, minutes to an hour. That is a pretty wide window of time. And he simply can't say, and that's because of the advanced state of decomposition. She may have been dead for weeks to months before her body was found. We saw in very graphic imagery exactly what her body looked like when the pieces were found in body bags inside that vehicle. So he can't say. He can't say which penetrating wound happened first. It took them about 3 months just to finalize their autopsy findings and confirm her cause of death. So he doesn't...
No instrument confirmed as the murder weapon. No conclusive account of what happened inside that house. What the prosecution did have was harder to dispute: cell phone and vehicle location data placing Burke's phone and his Tesla moving together, away from the home, roughly 90 minutes after Celeste's last message.
That's right. It came up again. This was from testimony that another LAPD expert spoke to a couple days ago last week during the first few days of this preliminary hearing. And in short, what that testimony established was that David's phone and David's Tesla were moving in the same place at the same time the night that Celeste was allegedly killed. So that came up again today, and they reminded the courts that as part of the prosecution's case, they found David's vehicle and his phone left his Hollywood Hills home at about 11:30 p.m., so about an hour and a half after Celeste arrived at that home, and then headed up to Lake Cachuma. Now,
traveling north to a supercharging station near Lake Cachuma, where, months later, investigators recovered her passport card. A horrific and barbaric killing. The phrase again, because it's the frame prosecutors want the public, and eventually a jury, to hold on to, regardless of which procedural gaps the defense manages to open. There is also the matter of what people around Celeste knew. Family members, by the prosecution's own account in court, were aware she spent time with Burke. Trips to the mall, to the movies, travel her parents reportedly consented to. None of that changes the legal reality. Prosecutors stated flatly and repeatedly her age is not a negotiable fact.
So to be clear, Jesse, as you stated, and the prosecution made this very clear in court today, several different ways, it does not matter how old Celeste told David she was. That does not absolve him of these child sexual abuse charges. It does not matter if she lied to him about her age and said she was 18 when she was 13. That does not change the factual substance surrounding that particular charge, sexual abuse of a minor under 14. It also does not matter that her parents consented to letting her travel with him. It also does not matter that her parents, her aunts, her cousins, and apparently her older sister were aware that she spent time with him, went to the mall with him, went to the movies with him. That does not make it okay.
And consent or awareness by others does not erase the alleged abuse. What remains genuinely unknown and unaddressed even now is how much anyone around her understood about the full extent of what was happening, including a reported pregnancy and termination in January 2024, when Celeste was 13.
We're aware the two of them spent time together. But beyond that, we don't know if her parents were aware of this purported abortion that happened in January 2024. And let me just remind you, in January 2024, Celeste was
The judge's ruling sent all 3 charges forward.
The judge found that there is sufficient cause to believe the defendant is guilty and to move this trial on all 3 counts, talking about how such a low standard it is. The judge reminded this is an exceedingly low standard, sufficient cause to hold someone to answer, again, probable cause. Apparently, David was staring straight ahead at the judge with his arms folded in front of him as she was reading this case, the law notes, court decisions. So yes, the judge found that there's sufficient probable cause. This is going to move forward. And it appears that an arraignment on these charges is going to be held on Monday, August 31st at 8:30 a.m.
Bail was denied. Arraignment was set for August 31st. And Burke, according to reporting from inside the courtroom, sat largely still through most of it, until testimony turned to those newly revealed text messages when he began, for the first time in the hearing, taking notes. A horrific and barbaric killing, said once more, outside the courthouse by the district attorney himself.
Decision.
Good afternoon. My name is Nathan Hochman. I'm the Los Angeles County District Attorney. Today I am here to announce that Judge Charlene Olmedo held David Anthony Burke, who goes by the name of a singer David spelled D4VT, to answer for the horrific and barbaric killing of a 14-year-old at the time, Celeste Rivas Hernandez. She has held him to answer for first-degree murder with the special circumstances of lying in wait, doing this crime for financial gain, and murdering a witness to an investigation. David Anthony Burke has also been held to answer for the mutilation of the remains of Celeste Rivas Hernandez on September 8th, 2025, and he has also been held to answer for engaging in continuous lewd and lascivious acts with a 13-year-old.
Standing beside the prosecutor who built this case witness by witness, record by record. What's left unresolved isn't whether a hearing standard was met. It was. What's left is whether the self-defense theory the defense is clearly building toward can survive contact with a jury demanding proof beyond a reasonable doubt, and whether the missing footage, the forgetful driver, and the wide window of time will be enough to create doubt where the prosecution insists there is none. For the primary record of what was actually said and decided in this hearing, the case complaint and the district attorney's public statement are both part of the public record through the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office. Read them yourself and ask based only on what's been established so far. Not speculation, not framing. Do you think the evidence points to premeditation or to something the legal system hasn't fully named yet? If you want more forensic breakdowns like this one, evidence first, verdict never assumed. Like this video, share it, subscribe, and turn on notifications. We'll be back when the next piece of this case becomes public record. Dear viewers, we invite you to delve deeper into the tragic case of 14-year-old Celeste Rivas. Discover the layers of evidence presented in court and ponder the questions that remain unanswered. Thank you for watching. Sincerely, CrimeNest Media Team,